George Washington's involvement in contributing to the creation of the new order began prior to the Declaration of Independence. On the 19th of June 1775, Washington was appointed the Commander-in-Chief of the developing Continental Army by the Second Continental Congress, and he held that position until 1783. John Adams pointed out that there was also great political advantage in having someone like George Washington appointed Commander-in-Chief, as he was outside of New England and taking command of a military force that was congregated around Boston and largely made up of New Englanders would in fact give him an advantage. He was a veteran of the French and Indian War and as such possessed military expertise, but he actually possessed no direct experience with commanding a large military force. Washington had learned many important command principles from the British regular officers that he marched with during the French and Indian War, and also British Army manuals that he studied. He also witnessed firsthand how vulnerable British Army formations could be in the rough, timbered frontier that now predominated much of North America, and as such, this would give him a great contribution to defending the new order in America. His leadership of the Continental Army has been immortalised in visual representations such as crossing the Delaware. This movement across the Delaware followed Washington's great triumph against the Hessian forces at Trenton on the 26th of December 1776. Fearing a counter-attack by British regular soldiers, Washington hustled his tired warriors and frozen Hessian captives back to Pennsylvanian side of the Delaware River. As such, the early years of the War of Independence saw many near defeats at the hands of the British. In fighting the war, Washington faced also a significant challenge in resourcing his army. Due to little financial resources, local farmers and merchants were more prepared to sell their goods to the British Army since they had ready cash to pay, whereas Washington's army could only offer what were called promissory notes, or IOUs. Washington overcame this by implementing innovative efforts of appointing Nathanael Greene as his new quartermaster. A quartermaster is the person who's responsible for administering barracks, laying out the camp and looking after supplies. Greene, who was initially concerned about taking this thankless job, overhauled the inefficient supply system and greatly improved the state of the Continental Army through his efforts. With the Declaration of Independence and the intensification of the conflict with the British, Washington had shown exemplary leadership and was known to advocate strongly for the needs of the men under his control, and especially during his efforts at Valley Forge, which have been celebrated and mythologised in American history. Starting during the winter of 1777, Washington took the bold and controversial move to have all of his soldiers in his army inoculated against smallpox, an infection, using a technique called variolation. Later during the winter encampment at Valley Forge, Washington even went further, demanding that his entire army be inoculated, an action that required great secrecy since inoculated soldiers were incapacitated for a period of time. By some reports, death by smallpox in the ranks dropped by 17% as a result of this action, and all deaths to a low 1% of all deaths, a tremendous reduction. Another initiative of Washington was to convince Congress in 1777 to appoint a Prussian Baron von Steuben as a general and Inspector General of the Continental Army. Steuben promptly formed a model of company soldiers and trained them to march, use the bayonet, and execute orders quickly on the battlefield, making the Continental Army a more disciplined and a more organised fighting force. As the War of Independence dragged on, Washington increasingly resorted to using a style of guerrilla warfare against the superior British Army, who were tactically conservative. Washington also became skillful in protecting himself from sniping generals and interfering politicians. The problems, however, never ceased. In 1781, the Continental Congress was bankrupt and cut funding dramatically to the Continental Army. In addition, citizen support was at its lowest. Army desertions continued at a rapid pace and mutinies also occurred. Despite this, Washington won important strategic victories, and by 1781, with the victory at Yorktown, with the French and Navy's indispensable help, he sealed the war. Washington's contribution to defending the new order during the Revolutionary War is also evident in his dealing with the emerging conspiracy within his own soldiers. When he was made aware of what was called the Newburgh Conspiracy, Washington appeared in front of his people on March 15, 1783, and challenged the gathered groups of officers. He said, "My God, what can this writer have in view by recommending such measures? Can he be a friend to the army? Can he be a friend to this country? Rather, is he not an insidious foe?" Towards the end of the address, Washington reached into his pocket to retrieve a pair of spectacles, and in a theatrical remark he said, "I have not only grown grey, but also blind in service to my country." This displayed the self-sacrifice that he believed he was portraying by the long-standing leader, and this deeply affected many of the officers who in turn abandoned their thoughts and returned to the obvious affection of their leader. On December 23, 1783, Washington strode into the State House of Annapolis, Maryland, and surrendered his military commission to a grateful Continental Congress. In front of the gathered congressmen, Washington declared, "Having now finished the work assigned me, I retire from the great theatre of military action, and bidding an affectionate farewell to this august body under whose orders I have so long acted, I here offer my commission and take my leave of all the employments of public life."